My mother poisoned our dog because she hated pets. Me, 32F, and my husband Mark, 34M, had been married for 5 years. We've always had a great relationship, built on trust, communication, and respect for each other. We both come from close-knit families, but mine has always been a bit more dysfunctional, to put it lightly. My mother, Diane, 58F, has always been the center of drama and chaos. She's a narcissist to the core, and everything has to revolve around her. She's manipulative, controlling, and has a nasty habit of pitting family members against each other for her own amusement. My father, Robert, 60M, is a kind-hearted man, but he's been enabling her behavior for years, always making excuses for her and trying to keep the peace. My older sister, Emma, 36F, has been the golden child, constantly seeking our mother's approval and validation, even at the expense of her own happiness. Despite the toxicity in my family, Mark and I have tried to maintain a cordial relationship with them, mostly for the sake of my dad and my younger brother, Alex, 28M. We've set firm boundaries, but my mother has always found ways to push them, making snide comments or trying to insert herself into our lives uninvited. Recently, Mark and I decided to adopt a rescue dog, a beautiful golden retriever named Buddy. We were overjoyed, and Buddy quickly became a beloved member of our little family. My mother, however, was less than thrilled. She's always had a strange dislike for pets, claiming they're dirty and a waste of money. When we invited my parents over for dinner to introduce them to Buddy, my mother made a show of reluctantly petting him, all the while making snide remarks about how we were wasting our time and money on a mangy mutt. A few weeks later, Mark and I had to go out of town for a work conference. We arranged for a trusted pet sitter to come and stay with Buddy, but my mother insisted on helping out and offered to stop by every day to check on him. Against our better judgment, we agreed, mostly to keep the peace. Little did we know, it would be a decision we'd come to deeply regret. When we returned home a week later, something seemed off. Buddy didn't greet us with his usual enthusiasm, and he seemed different, somehow. We chalked it up to him missing us and tried to settle back into our routine. Over the next few days, Buddy's behavior became increasingly concerning. He was skittish, jumpy, and would sometimes cower in corners for no apparent reason. He also seemed to have lost his appetite, and we noticed he was losing weight rapidly. Worried, we took him to the vet, who ran a battery of tests. The results were shocking. Buddy had been poisoned with a highly toxic substance, likely antifreeze or some other household chemical. The vet said it was a miracle he was still alive, but the damage to his kidneys and liver was severe. They would do everything they could, but his prognosis was grim. Devastated and enraged, we called an emergency family meeting, demanding answers. My mother, of course, feigned ignorance, claiming she had no idea what could have happened to that mangy mutt. But my father and sister exchanged worried glances, and it was clear they knew something. Under intense questioning, my sister finally broke down and confessed that she had witnessed my mother deliberately poisoning Buddy's food and water bowls during one of her check-ins while we were away. The revelation was like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe the depths of my mother's cruelty and depravity. To intentionally harm an innocent animal, just because she disliked pets? It was unforgivable. When we confronted her, my mother didn't even have the decency to deny it. Instead, she launched into a tirade about how we were ungrateful brats who wasted our money on a stupid animal instead of focusing on more important things, like her. My father tried to play peacemaker, as usual, but this time, even he couldn't defend her actions. The lines had been crossed, and there was no going back. The argument escalated quickly, with my mother doubling down on her behavior, claiming she had done us a favor by getting rid of that mangy mutt. She even had the audacity to suggest that we should be thanking her for saving us from the burden of owning a pet. I was livid, and Mark had to physically restrain me from lunging at her. We knew then that our relationship with her was irreparably damaged. How could we ever trust her again, after she had so callously and deliberately tried to kill an innocent creature we loved? We gave her an ultimatum: either she sought professional help for her narcissistic behavior and made a genuine effort to change, or we would cut her out of our lives completely. Unsurprisingly, she scoffed at the idea, convinced that she had done nothing wrong. With a heavy heart, we followed through on our threat. We cut all ties with my mother, blocking her from our lives completely. My father and sister were caught in the middle, torn between loyalty to my mother and the desire to maintain a relationship with us. In the end, my father chose to stand by my mother, as he always had, enabling her toxic behavior out of misguided devotion. My sister, however, saw this as her wake-up call and began the long process of breaking free from our mother's manipulation and control. It was a painful and difficult decision, but we knew it was necessary for our own well-being. We couldn't allow someone so cruel and lacking in empathy to be a part of our lives, especially now that we had experienced the depths of her depravity firsthand. In the weeks that followed, my mother's behavior only became more erratic and disturbing. She bombarded us with hateful messages, accusing us of turning our backs on family and threatening to make our lives a living hell. At one point, she even showed up at our home, pounding on the door and screaming obscenities until the police were called and she was escorted away. It was a terrifying ordeal, and we realized we needed to take legal action to protect ourselves. We filed for a restraining order, which thankfully was granted without much difficulty, given the evidence of her increasingly unstable and threatening behavior. With the restraining order in place, we thought we could finally have some peace and begin to heal from the trauma inflicted by my mother's actions. But she wasn't done tormenting us yet. In a twisted act of revenge, she decided to target the one thing she knew would hurt us most, Buddy. Despite the vet's best efforts, his condition continued to deteriorate, and it became clear that the damage from the poisoning was too severe for him to recover. We were faced with the agonizing decision of whether to prolong his suffering or to let him go peacefully. In the end, we chose the humane path, holding him in our arms as he took his last breath, our tears mingling with his fur. The loss of Buddy was devastating, made even worse by the knowledge that it was entirely preventable, and caused by the callous actions of someone who was supposed to love and protect us. In our grief, we made the difficult decision to press charges against my mother for animal cruelty and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It was a long and arduous process, but ultimately, the evidence was overwhelming, and she was found guilty on all counts. The judge, appalled by the cruelty of her actions, handed down a harsh sentence, 2 years in prison and a hefty fine, as well as a lifetime ban on owning any animals. While the legal victory was bittersweet, it didn't bring us the closure or healing we had hoped for. My mother, true to form, remained unrepentant and unapologetic, even as she was led away in handcuffs. She spewed vile insults at us, accusing us of betraying her and vowing to make us pay for our disloyalty. It was a chilling reminder of the depths of her narcissism and lack of empathy. My father, unfortunately, remained steadfastly loyal to her, choosing to stand by her side despite the overwhelming evidence of her cruelty. It was a devastating blow, and we realized that we had lost not just our mother, but our father as well, to the toxic grip of her manipulation. In the aftermath of the trial, we found ourselves emotionally and mentally exhausted. The ordeal had taken a heavy toll on us, and we struggled to come to terms with the fact that our own family had inflicted such cruelty and pain upon us. We sought counseling to help us process our trauma and grief, slowly piecing our lives back together one day at a time. It was a long and arduous journey, but we drew strength from each other and the unconditional love and support of our friends and the family members who had stood by us. Even now, years later, the scars of that experience still linger. We've built a new life for ourselves, one free from the toxicity and drama of my family, but the memories and the pain are never far from the surface. We've learned to set firm boundaries and surround ourselves with people who truly love and support us, but the trust that was shattered by my mother's actions has been difficult to rebuild. In many ways, we've had to redefine what family means to us, not just blood ties, but the chosen connections we've forged with those who have shown us true loyalty and compassion. Looking back, it's hard to believe that something as simple as adopting a pet could have unleashed such a maelstrom of chaos and cruelty. But in a way, it was the catalyst that exposed the true depths of my mother's narcissism and lack of empathy, and ultimately led us to break free from her toxic grip. While the pain and loss will always be a part of our story, we've learned to find strength and resilience in each other, and in the knowledge that we did the right thing by standing up against cruelty and protecting ourselves and our loved ones. Our journey has been a difficult one, but it has also taught us the true meaning of love, loyalty, and what it means to be a family, not bound by blood, but by the unbreakable bonds of compassion and support. Break Story 2. Me, 38F, and my husband, 40M, have been married for 12 years. We have 2 kids, a son, 10M, and a daughter, 8F. My husband's family has always been a bit difficult. His parents, 65M, and 62F, are incredibly wealthy and have always looked down on me for coming from a working-class background. They constantly made snide remarks about my job, I'm a teacher, my appearance, and my lack of sophistication. But the worst part was how they treated our kids. They would shower our son with expensive gifts and praise, while virtually ignoring our daughter. It was like she didn't even exist to them. The favoritism towards our son was blatant and hurtful. They would take him on lavish vacations, buy him the latest gadgets, and dote on him endlessly. Meanwhile, our daughter would get a token gift, like a cheap stuffed animal or a set of crayons. It broke my heart to see the hurt and confusion on her face. She's such a sweet, loving child, and she couldn't understand why her grandparents treated her so differently. My husband tried to talk to his parents about it, but they just brushed it off, claiming we were overreacting and making a big deal out of nothing. Things came to a head last year when we discovered that my in-laws had set up a trust fund for our son, worth over $500,000. They did this without telling us, and there was nothing set aside for our daughter. When we confronted them about it, they said they didn't see the point in providing for her since she was just a girl. That was the final straw for me. I was livid. How could they be so blatantly sexist and cruel? Our daughter is just as deserving as our son, and their favoritism was damaging her self-esteem and our family dynamic. We had a massive blowout with my in-laws. My husband and I made it clear that their behavior was unacceptable and that they needed to treat our children equally. They refused to see reason, claiming that boys are more important and that they could do whatever they wanted with their money. It was a heated argument, and they ended up storming out, saying they were cutting us off financially and that we'd regret this. Little did they know, the true regret was yet to come. After they left, my husband and I had a long talk. We were both devastated by their actions, but also determined to make things right for our daughter. We decided that we needed to take drastic action to teach them a lesson and ensure our children were treated fairly. We consulted a lawyer and learned that, due to their extreme wealth, my in-laws had set up various trusts and business holdings in our state and others. This gave us an idea: if they wanted to play favorites with money, we'd hit them where it hurt the most, their precious bank accounts. Over the next few months, we quietly gathered evidence of my in-laws' assets and financial dealings. It wasn't easy, but we managed to uncover a tangled web of offshore accounts, shady business partnerships, and potential tax evasion. Armed with this information, we contacted the IRS and state tax authorities, providing them with detailed documentation of my in-laws' questionable financial practices. The authorities took our allegations seriously and launched a full-scale investigation. As the investigation progressed, the authorities uncovered even more damning evidence of my in-laws' shady dealings. They had been systematically underreporting their income, hiding assets in offshore accounts, and engaging in various forms of financial fraud. The authorities eventually raided their homes and businesses, seizing records and assets. My in-laws were in deep trouble, facing potential criminal charges and millions in fines and back taxes. Throughout this process, my husband and I remained anonymous, never revealing our involvement in tipping off the authorities. We wanted our in-laws to stew in their own mess, wondering how they had been caught after years of getting away with their schemes. When they finally realized the extent of the legal trouble they were in, they came crawling back to us, begging for help and forgiveness. But we were done with their games. We told them to face the consequences of their actions and hope that they learned a valuable lesson about fairness and equality. As the legal proceedings against my in-laws dragged on, the authorities continued to uncover more and more evidence of their misdeeds. It turned out that their financial crimes were just the tip of the iceberg. They had also been involved in various forms of corporate fraud, bribery, and even money laundering. The charges kept piling up, and it became clear that they were facing the very real possibility of significant prison time. My in-laws tried everything they could to avoid jail time. They hired teams of high-priced lawyers, attempted to negotiate plea deals, and even tried to flee the country at one point. But the evidence against them was overwhelming, and the authorities were determined to make an example of them. In the end, they were both sentenced to lengthy prison terms, 12 years for my father-in-law and 8 years for my mother-in-law. The judge also ordered them to pay tens of millions in fines and restitution, effectively wiping out their once vast fortune. With my in-laws behind bars and their assets seized, we thought the nightmare was finally over. But there was one final twist. During the legal proceedings, it came to light that my in-laws had secretly set up a second trust fund for our son, this one worth over $10 million. However, due to their criminal activities, the authorities were able to seize this trust fund as well. Rather than let the money go to waste, we petitioned the court to have it divided equally between our son and daughter, ensuring that they would both be taken care of and treated fairly. After a lengthy legal battle, the court agreed to our request. The seized $10 million trust fund was split evenly, with $5 million going into separate trusts for each of our children. This was a huge relief for us, knowing that our daughter would no longer be treated as a second-class citizen by her grandparents. She and our son would now have equal financial resources and opportunities, regardless of their gender. With the legal proceedings finally resolved, We were able to move on with our lives, free from the toxic influence of my in-laws. Their actions had nearly torn our family apart, but in the end, justice had prevailed. We made sure to keep our children informed about what had happened, in an age-appropriate way, of course. We wanted them to understand that their grandparents' behavior was wrong and that discrimination of any kind is never acceptable. The emotional aftermath of this ordeal was significant, especially for our daughter. She had spent years feeling unloved and inferior because of her grandparents' favoritism, and it had taken a toll on her self-esteem. With the help of a therapist, we worked to undo the damage and help her understand that she is just as valuable and deserving as anyone else. It was a long process, but slowly she began to regain her confidence and self-worth. Looking back, I know that our actions were extreme, but I don't regret them for a second. My in-laws had been given countless opportunities to change their ways and treat our children equally, but they refused to see reason. In the end, they brought their downfall upon themselves through their own greed, selfishness, and discrimination. While it was a painful and difficult process, we emerged as a stronger, more united family, with a renewed commitment to equality, fairness, and standing up for what's right. Our children will never have to wonder if they are loved or valued, and that is the greatest reward of all.